All right. And hopefully everybody can see me out there in YouTube and Rumble and on Facebook. I just wanted Tom brought this idea to me. If you as you can see from the title, we're doing a an hour or so of Missouri Constitution history. Because today's date, July 19th of 1820, is a very important date in Missouri Constitution history. Tom's going to lay all that out for us because this is the man that I default to when I need constitutional knowledge or an understanding of how a piece of legislation would violate the Constitution and other things like that. Tom is the gentleman that I always default to on that. So, Tom, good afternoon to you. I'm not used to saying good afternoon. I'm always used to saying good evening, and I had to check myself a little bit there.
Yeah, as long as you don't tell me it's Saturday night or Friday night or Tuesday night, we're in good shape.
All right, Tom. So lay it out for us, brother. Lay out the historical importance of this day in really Missouri history, and then we can just kind of proceed through the history of the Missouri Constitution. And I'm sure at some point we'll get into the fact of it's constantly being violated, and it's been that way for the last several decades. But go ahead and lay out the historical part of this, and we can delve deeper.
Okay, well, the powers to be that wrote the state constitution got together on June the 12th of 1820. And it starts out with we, the people of Missouri, inhabiting the limits hereinafter designated by our representatives in convention assembled at St. Louis on Monday, the 12th day of June, 1820, do mutually agree to form and establish a free and independent republic by the name of the state of Missouri, and for the government thereof do ordain and establish this constitution. And then it goes on to create articles. But on July 19th of 1820 was when this document was adopted to be the very first constitution in the state of Missouri. And it was in effect from 1820, actually from 1821 when the state was made a state, and up to 1865. And one of the things that people don't realize that in reality that constitution was not ratified by the people of the state of Missouri. That was written by about 37 people in St. Louis. The gentleman by the name of David Barton is the gentleman who headed up the Constitution Committee, and it was so that they could present this document to Congress so they could vote on whether or not to give Missouri statehood. So on today's date, in 1820, we have the Constitution's birthday.
Nice. And I just had to look up because I knew the year, but I didn't know the official day. August 10th, 1821, President James Monroe signed a proclamation for Missouri to become the 24th state, and the state capital was located in St. Charles until a permanent location was designated. So, another little piece to add to that, because we talk about because when you told me 1820, I was like, now wait a minute, we didn't become a state until 1821. Not thinking that, of course, they're going to start framing everything up before this official proclamation from the president of the state of Missouri joining the union. Now, what I like there, Tom, is how they recognize that it's a republic and not a democracy, or just saying the word state and going on, that the word republic is in the statement as they announce this document. So kind of an important thing that, as you look through the media and at the politicians today, it's kind of one of those words that always gets left out and has been replaced by that horrible D word that we hear so much. So and again, to me, that kind of sticks out as something very important that these so-called experts today kind of just forget about it or shrug it off. So July 19th, 1820, and then you bring up 1865. It was written by 37 people in St. Louis. What from 1820 to 1865 are there what are maybe some significant changes in the original constitution to the next one in 1865? Are there anything are there any that come to mind as far as some important differences in the beginning document to the second one?
Well, in the Constitution of 1820, the sheriff's office and the office of the coroner are actually codified constitutional required offices to be elected by the citizenry of the people. And of course, back in that time frame, the citizenry was every free white male citizen who would have achieved the age of 21 years of age.
Okay. And they had to were they required to be a landowner as well?
It does not appear to this document that they were required to be a landowner at that point. Now, earlier on, in order to have a vote, yeah, you had to be an actual landowner in order to vote for. But they laid out things like the Article 1 of the state constitution was basically the boundaries of the state of Missouri. And then Article 2 was the distribution of powers. So they divided themselves into three distinct departments, which were basically the legislative, the executive, and the magistracy, which was basically judicial. And then Article 3 was legislative power. And one of the things that even our Constitution says today, and I've got a lot of disagreement with people who are in Jefferson City with how they deem this term, but Section 1 says the legislative power shall be vested in a General Assembly, which shall consist of a Senate and a House representative. And when you go back to what is the definition of legislative power, it refers to the authority to make and alter laws. So when people like, I don't know, you name your favorite state elected official up there in Jefferson City decide that, or let's say in Owensville, they decide that they're going to write a law that says X, Y, Z. Where do they get any legislative power from? Have you granted it to them? And if not, why are they writing legislation which creates a legislative decree unless they've gone through the process of today's modern constitution, which is the creation of charter cities and charter counties? And then in Article 4, it goes to, let's see, the General Assembly, this one's kind of neat. The General Assembly shall have no power to pass laws, first, for the emancipation of slaves without the consent of their owners, or without paying them before such emancipation, a full equivalent for such slaves so emancipated, and second, to prevent bona fide immigrants to this state or actual settlers therein from bringing from any of the United States or from any of their territories such persons as may there be deemed to be slaves, so long as the persons of the same description are allowed to be held as slaves by the laws of this state. So even codified in the Constitution, that was one of in the very beginning, the reason why it took so long for Missouri to reach statehood was this very awkward disagreement that was created when Missouri kind of wanted to be a free state. The Congress wanted, or I should say, Missouri wanted to be a slave state. Congress determined they were going to be a free state. There was a section, if you read the current Constitution at the very beginning, where it talks about how as long as Missouri exempts itself from, I think it's Section 2, that they will have been able to achieve statehood. And if you look back in the history of Missouri, pretty much anything from I'm going to say US 50 down in today's terminology was basically slave owning territory, and everything from US 50 north up to the Iowa line was considered free territory. And then you can go into the Kansas Missouri border wars, which was predominantly fought because of slavery. The Kansans would come over here, they would steal the slaves from the people in the southern portion of Missouri, take them back over to Kansas. Well, then the southern part of Missouri created their little militias. They would go over to Kansas. They would burn down towns and everything else and bring the slaves back over to where they belonged. And that was back in the 1850s. So that was actually before the Civil War.
Yeah. Now, when I was working for the local pest control company here, and I went outside of Owensville. I don't know, it's 10, 15 minutes out of County Road. And the customer there told me that somewhere down that gravel road is a marker. Somebody put an historical marker on that property somewhere, that marked where I believe Southern forces had marched through, and they were demanding that these family members give up some cattle or some food to that army of troops that were moving through, and they refused. And two of them, I believe, were killed. The others scrambled and ran off, and then the forces took so many head of their cattle and everything else. So sometimes I don't know. I just remember being in school and they called Missouri like a neutral state. They didn't say it was a free state or it was a slave state. They would just say Missouri was a neutral territory. That's how it was explained to us in history classes back then. Which I guess, yes, if you're anything south of 50 was more slave owning, and then north of 50 was more free, freedom or freedom for the blacks, then I guess that makes kind of sense. But of course, you get told a whole bunch of rubbish about the Civil War anyway. So you get told so many lies, it's hard to keep track of everything. Um, yeah, some people and even I tend to forget about how much Civil War history, some of the battles and everything else that occurred in Missouri, that were kind of important in the Civil War, or as some of my friends so lovingly call the War of Northern Aggression, however you want to word that or phrase that war. But there's some interesting Civil War history when it comes to the state of Missouri, and I think everybody just kind of gets lost in the actual southern states, or some of the big Gettysburg and some of the other big battlegrounds. But isn't there like some kind of Civil War thing down around Springfield, Tom?
Oh yeah, we have Wilson's Creek Battlefield
That's
down
right.
here,
Yeah.
and there's a whole segment of history of how it is that the Union forces basically invaded Missouri, and I think the government packed up its stuff and it relocated from where it was at somewhere down in here, and they tried to get forces from Arkansas to come up and help because they were outnumbered. But yeah, according to what I've been able to read, and I'm an individual who grew up in Pennsylvania. I didn't live but maybe an hour away from Gettysburg. So, that was something that when I was going to school, we used to always go out to Gettysburg for field trips and stuff like that. But you really didn't learn a whole lot about, I would say, Missouri history. But then when we moved here and somebody told me about Wilson's Creek Battlefield, I just kind of jokingly said, yeah, right. The Civil War happened in Missouri. Who are you trying to kid? And then when I went out there, it's like, holy heck, these are things that you're not completely informed of and you're not completely aware of. And then I happened to, one day I was listening to a podcast, and you know how when on YouTube, after you've listened to something, you have like 5 seconds and then it goes to the next thing. It just happens to be in your next in line. I allowed it to roll through, and this dude was discussing the border wars between Missouri and Kansas, and he had like I'm going to say there was like 12 or 13 different episodes. And after I listened to each one, then I subscribed to his thing and I went back and listened to them again. And you get to the point you go, well, holy heck, Missouri and Kansas were actually, they were having a civil war over slavery before the actual civil war of slavery, or ended up becoming about slavery, even occurred. But you don't learn, I mean, I guess if you're not from Missouri, maybe they did or did not teach that in school, but that's something that I would have never known unless I moved here and I stumbled upon that podcast.
Yeah, I don't remember learning much. They might have highlighted a few things, but now I know that a good friend of my wife's family, their son, is a teacher here at the local school district, and he was when he was first like working for the school. They took him. They took a group of kids to another battle side of a battle somewhere that couldn't have been too horribly far away from Owensville. I don't remember exactly where it was, but there had been some kind of fortress there. And they're showing them like here the fortress would have been here, and the army attacking came from this direction. And this teacher, friend of ours, who had been in the army for 6 or 8 years, served some tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, said, listen, you got to understand something. He's like, think about it this way, because the tree line, even the way it existed back then, where the tree line was, where they would have come out of, and the amount of ground they had to cover to get to the fortress was a pretty, it was a long way. And he said, the modern war now, you're of course you're dropping bombs and you got cover and all this stuff generally. He's like, think about this, folks. You're coming out of that wood line and you have no choice but to run forward towards that fortress across this open ground. There's no stone fences to hide behind. There's nothing. There's no trees. You can't duck for cover. It's just you come out of the wood line, attack, and run toward this fortress that had been there. And he goes, that's a different kind of warfare back then. He didn't that There's nothing close to modern warfare. So yeah, when you think about the Civil War and you think about all the history in the Civil War, and they're just standing face to face and just shooting each other, and like I don't know. But
Yeah,
anyway,
and they ran
interesting.
out of bullets. They went to their bayonets.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just running each other with knives on. I don't know. It's insane. But yeah,
That's hardcore patriotism there, man.
it kind of is um when you're fighting for the North or the South, however, whichever part you ended up, if whether whatever part of the country you were in and you sided with those forces, yes, and you're forced to just literally run in another human being on the other side of the fence who ideologically doesn't align with you, maybe, and then you're just stabbing each other, and you've got huge cannonballs flopping across the ground, and you know, I don't know. It's a hellish thing to think about and try to imagine, because again, we haven't fought wars like that in a very, very long time. And it's a little disturbing when you think about it. And if you try to imagine the best you could, because you've never lived that, so to really see it and imagine it and it be accurate is a little difficult anyway, because none of us, at least I don't know, no one that I know of has had to fight like that. Um, so yeah, again, it's interesting. There's so much history out there to learn, and I am going to have to look up that channel because now I'm interested. And I always get caught up in the series, well, the two different series on YouTube, The Great War and then World War II, both done by uh, they're all for the most part narrated and done by a gentleman by the name of Indy Nidell. They're spectacularly done. He does a great job of keeping everything upbeat and interesting, and he keep the episodes maybe 15, 20 minutes long max, and they just go go go. So, but I am definitely going to have to check those out. That'd be good listening material on my way back and forth from work. So I'll have to have you send me those links or the link to that channel later, Tom, and I will definitely check it out.
Yeah, it was. I mean, this guy got into some really, he had like, oh, I'm going to say there was like maybe 12 or 13 different podcasts that were strictly the Missouri-Kansas border war. And then he did like an 8 or 9 segment on the Trail of Tears. And I'm not too sure exactly. I'm taking most of except for the stuff that I've actually researched to find out if he was telling me the truth. I didn't research 100% of everything that he said, but I looked at enough of it to go, okay, I can believe that this guy hasn't in the stuff that I've looked at that he has said occurred. He has not lied to me yet, so I have no reason to believe that any of the things that he will say within this podcast at any given point in time is going to be unfactual. But, there were certain things that he would say, and then I would go and look it up, and it was either identically to the way he said it as if he was reading it verbatim, or it was close enough that what he said could be found in print or could be found online in enough differing types of publications to go, okay, that's the way it occurred.
Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah, I found a page. It's procon.org, and it's got the 1820 Missouri Constitution in like a more of a PDF
Yeah,
format. I just kind
I was actually going to link that on your YouTube thing because
of okay.
I was scrolling to the bottom to get a count of how many people actually signed the document.
Oh yeah,
because there's 14 articles in the old 1820 Constitution. But I would bet those 14 articles, like the 14 articles that we have now, I bet you back then they would make up a third of the book that we currently have.
Yeah,
even though we have had the same amount of articles.
Yeah, I'm looking at the counties now. So the counties listed: Cape Girardeau, Cooper, Franklin, Howard, Jefferson, Lincoln, Montgomery, Madison, Pike, St. Charles, St. Genevieve, and St. Louis, and Washington, and then one from Wayne County. So I noticed that Gasconade County, the county that I live in, is not, maybe wasn't, well, clearly probably wasn't founded yet then. I'm not sure. I don't know the history of Gasconade County that well. I might have to look into that just to see when that county was, you know, uh, declared valid or whatever year that was in the 1800s. But yeah, so um, let's see. So David Barton was a president of the convention and representative from the county of St. Louis.
Yeah,
Okay.
because I jokingly asked Mike Moon one day because he and I were texting about something, or he called me about something, and he told me he was down with David Barton at Wall Builders. Sure, that was. And I had asked him. I said, "Well, have you talked to him?" He said, "Oh yeah, he and I've had a couple discussions." I said, "Good. Next time you see him, does he? I mean, tell me, does he look like he's like 200 years old?" he's like, he's like, "Well, why do you ask?" I said, "Because he's the guy that wrote the state constitution." No, surely not. I said, "Yeah, according to the 1820 state constitution, David Barton is the guy who he's." I said, "I just want to know, is he related?" I'm quite certain it's not the same dude, and if it is, I want his fountain of youth. And according to David Barton, he didn't know a darn thing about the David Barton who wrote the state constitution.
So, okay, I just found it. Gasconade County was organized on the 25th of November, 1820. So not too long after this first constitution. And the county seat has been Herman since 1842. So a little bit there, something else for the local folks here, if they happen to across this live stream to check out. The original counties were Arkansas, Cape Girardeau, New Madrid, St. Charles, St. Louis, St. John, and Washington counties were apparently some of the first counties in Missouri. Um, so yeah, 1840 or 1820, November 25th, 6 days after my birthday. Maybe that'll help me remember. Um, Not that I get too much into Gasconade County history. I guess I should, since apparently there were Civil War troops marching through this area at some, or I mean, that's a little where the historical marker is probably like 5 to 10 miles north of town, but pretty freaking close. They might have marched through Owensville. It's hard to say um, how the troop movements were, but I may have to look into this just to see exactly um, where, if somebody's got that down documented somewhere. So I see we've got Article 6, education. Um, let's
Yeah,
see.
it's funny. I was just going to that.
Okay, go ahead. You go ahead and read it.
Because Section 1 says schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged in this state, and the General Assembly shall take measures to preserve from waste or damage such lands as have been or may hereafter be granted by the United States for the use of schools within each township in this state, and shall apply the funds which may arise from such land in strict conformity to the object of the grant, and one school or more shall be established in each township as soon as practicable and necessary, where the poor shall be taught gratis. So if you read this section, how did they establish the schools? With what money?
They got it from the
It was,
from
yeah, they
grants.
got it from the sale of the land.
Yeah.
So when people make the case that, oh, land taxation sucks, it never used to exist. Well, in reality, the sale of land in the state of Missouri and in other states after the original 13, a lot of them say something similar in their first constitutions, how the sales of the property were to go towards the erection of schools, which generally it ended up being when the churches were erected, then the schools went into the church, but the establishment of them came from the sale of the soil, and that's how the kids were educated.
And you talk about that because yes, the funds generated by the sale of land funded these schools or built these schools, however you want to put it. But now it's been uh, bastardized by the personal property tax, and some people would probably try to lead you to, well, see, I mean, we've had property tax, or we've had this type of funding forever. It's like, well, not in the beginning. We didn't have this awful form of taxation where you don't ever actually own your property, because if you don't pay your taxes, they'll take it back from you. So it's a totally different way of funding the schools from back then. It is interesting. So they try to have each township have a school. It's just funny because, I mean, as far as this constitution goes, and I don't know about the laws enacted towards education back in those times. But I mean, let's face it, they're not going to be anywhere close to what we have now, what these folks try to call an education system now, and the rules and all the stupid fire hoops that schools have to jump through in order to quote unquote educate your kid. Before they even start thinking about the education process, they have to go through all these other things. And I just about bet you in 1820 it wasn't anywhere close to that type of regulation on what was to be taught, how it was to be taught, and here's the curriculum. Don't stray from it. And some people will try to make the argument, well, they weren't very. I don't think they were very well educated back then, but I'm going to beg to differ on a few things because At least one, and I know I mentioned this to you. I think the last time after the show, the last time you were on with us, Tom, that I would much rather read the writings. I'm not saying there's no good writers now, but when you read the writings of the founders and from the people back then, it just seemed a lot of times it just seemed so much more eloquently put, and it just the emotion evoked from it. And I mean, and a lot of other people from these time periods, the Civil War era, or from the Revolutionary times to up to the Civil War, the way people wrote was just completely different than it is now. So for people to try to say, well, they were poorly educated, like, well, have you ever read anything some of those people wrote? I mean, clearly that can't be the case. I mean, now mind you, in those times there were a heck of a lot more farmers. The kids didn't go through 12 years of school because they needed to help to work the farm, and we didn't have the industrial age yet and all those other things. But I'm going to probably say that the education wasn't anything to slouch at in 1820 either.
No, I would imagine the education system back then, even though you had a smaller minority who would be considered very well endowed in their education than you do in today's time frame. But I would think in reading the letters back and forth between all the various individuals during that, like before the Declaration of Independence, during the Declaration of Independence, after the Declaration of, they spoke very matter of factly. They understood what their rights were, and those people were more than willing to give up their life to make sure that their rights were not infringed upon. Now I'm beginning to believe, and I have thought about this for some time, that a greater percentage of the people today are more than willing to give up their life for the government to tell them what their rights are and what they can and cannot do, because nobody to my knowledge on any large scale challenges the government, because the three branches of government have pretty much merged into one.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, and it's just it's a snake with multiple heads, and but man, when they latch on, they all latch on, fill you full of poison and whatnot. It is pretty creepy. I don't know. It would be an interesting. I need to do a better job of going back and looking at the history from time periods like this, the um the 1800s, pre Civil War, and then after the Civil War a little bit, and get a better idea of the um just the thought processes and the progression of the erosions of liberty, if you will. I mean, you have 18 during the Civil War. You have the suspension of habeas corpus. There have been people out there. We won't get into that now, but there are people out there who um, really question whether habeas corpus ever really those that ever returned after the Civil War, or was it has it always been suspended and it just hasn't been acted upon? But it is a very interesting it's a very interesting process, and a history to look at. And if you especially if you listen to people like Daryl Cooper or something, who dig into things, and then you're not supposed to believe anything that gentleman says, or some other, or the Scott Hortons, or whoever out there in the world who are documenting these things. You're not supposed to believe anything they say because it strays from the narrative. But so let me go back here, and we can progress on through this, because you said you had 14 articles here. Okay, so that was education.
Yeah, Article 9 is the militia.
Yeah, and that's the kind of one my eyes jumped to as I scrolled, because I saw internal improvement in banks, but the militia one is pretty interesting. Go ahead and get into that one, Tom.
Well, the field officers and the company officers shall be elected by the person subject to militia duty within their respective commands. Brigadier generals shall be elected by the field officers of their respective brigades, and major generals by the brigadiers and field officers of their respective divisions until otherwise directed by law. So at the very beginning, everything was done democratically, not democracy, but democratically.
There you go.
Section 2 was general and field officers shall appoint their officers of the staff. And the reason this is important, as people tend to find out when they get screwed over, is if you appoint your staff, you are more apt to find people who are more apt to your way of thinking. And you know that, I mean, granted, there are people who want people who are like cult members, but I think in that day and age, not only did you want people who were kind of like minded, you also wanted people who also were more than willing to speak up if they thought they were being misled or misguided in any manner. And then Section 3, the governor shall appoint an adjunct general and all other militia officers whose appointments are not otherwise provided for in this Constitution. And then, like Article 11 is the permanent seat of government. You know, that's the one that Josh Hawley has a problem with, or did before he became a U.S. senator. Article 12 is the mode of amending the Constitution. It's only one paragraph. That's kind of funny. And then Article 13 is they call them the Declaration of Rights. I think they should be known as the Declaration of Government Restrictions.
True that.
And it even talks about that all political power is vested in and derived from the people. The people of the state have the inherent sole and exclusive right of regulating the internal government and police thereof, and altering and abolishing their constitution and form of government whenever it may be necessary to their safety and their happiness. So some of the stuff that you see in today's Constitution in reality does go back to the very beginning of the 1820 state constitution. But I think because in 1875, when they had a constitutional convention, I believe in 1865, there was this, and I won't get into it, but the radical Republicans had a sworn oath literally in the Constitution. And it revolved around and dealt with the Civil War, the Union, Confederate type deal. So in 1875, when they had a constitutional convention and rewrote the Constitution, you now find in today's 2025 version, you can go back and see, well, this is the source of this is the Constitution of 1875, article yada yada yada. Well, in reality, a lot of those are actually, the source of them are the 1820 Constitution that was never really ratified by the people. It was only ratified by those people who helped pen it and send it to Washington, D.C. for it to be approved.
Yeah, I'm going through all these Declaration of Rights. Let's see. There's one about worship, that no person on account of his religious opinions can be rendered ineligible to any office of trust or profit under the state. That all elections shall be free and equal. That the right of trial by jury shall remain inviolate. So they got double jeopardy on here. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, no cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. And here we go. people should recognize this one, that the people ought to be secure in their persons, papers, houses, and effects from unreasonable searches and seizures, and no warrant to search any place or to seize any person or thing can issue without describing the place to be searched or the person or thing to be seized as nearly as may be, nor without probable cause supported by oath or affirmation. So, yeah.
Yeah, but oath or affirmation back in that time meant something completely different than what it means today.
Absolutely. Well, you know what? Just for the sake of why don't you elaborate on that a little bit, Tom?
Well, I think in back in those time frame, I was listening to Michael Bolton earlier on the 10th Amendment Center, and he was discussing impeachment proceedings.
Mm.
And he was rattling off all these different various people who have quotes and things involving what an oath, what an affirmation, what those were. Well, part of your oath was that you were going to abide by that oath 100%. So if you said that you were going to follow the Constitution, or you were to adhere to the penning of the Constitution, then it was your obligation to follow that, because according to some of the quotes that Michael Bolton was discussing earlier, and I don't know when this podcast is from. It may have been from last week or the week after, but literally that was an act of treason for you not to abide by your oath, for you to be outside the bounds or the scope of what it is that was the general understanding of what government is for. And it specifically says government is for the protection of life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, the industry of your own gains or the gains of your own industry or whatever the heck it is, and that all laws are to be created equal. And, there are also things that were in that time frame, and even in today's time frame, you can make the case that there are things that are unwritten, which should be well understood, but yet we've got a whole host of people. Well, the Constitution doesn't say that we can't do that, therefore we can. Well, no, that's not the correct way. The Constitution doesn't give you any permission to do that, therefore you can't. I mean, there are certain things that the legislature, the judicial, and the executive have been given permission to do. And in order to write a piece of legislation that follows along those lines, then that piece of legislation has to follow all of the lines within the confines of the Constitution. So you can't write a law that restricts my liberty. You can't write a law that restricts my life. You can't write a law that restricts my movement unless at some point in time I have violated somebody else's rights. But you don't find people who delve that deeply into this type of thinking from that time frame who get elected to a political office, except for Mike Moon, and now we've got Rep. Wolfen, who, when he discusses things that we'll get up there and discuss how it is that it violates this section of the Constitution, it violates this section of the Constitution, it violates this section of the Constitution. Granted, he's ignored, but that's exactly what he's supposed to do. He is supposed to, in his position as a representative, to also help educate those people who are in that chamber with him. And should they choose to ignore him after he gives a well-reasoned explanation on why a piece of legislation violates the state constitution, well, those people are in violation of their oath. And according to what I was listening to earlier with Michael Bolton, many of the framers and the founders back in that day saw that as a treasonous activity against the people of the state and the country.
Yeah, something that needs to come back definitely is you've violated your oath, and now you've been banished henceforth. Here's another one that I find interesting. Number 18, that no person who is religiously scrupulous of bearing arms can be compelled to do so, but may be compelled to pay an equivalent for military service in such manner as shall be prescribed by law, and that no priest, preacher of the gospel, or teacher of any religious persuasion or sect, regularly ordained as such, be subject to militia duty or compelled to bear arms. That's an interesting one, because that does, as far as I know, that's not recognized anymore. You turned 18, you register with the Selective Service, and if you get drafted, you don't get a religious exemption. Like, I don't believe in um, going out and just killing people because I'm told to do so. Things like that. Um, there used to be a gentleman from the local Jehovah Witness church that told me in the Vietnam War days that there were several Jehovah Witnesses that were in jail because they refused to uh to show up after they were drafted and you know, go to basic training and be shipped off to war. They refused. So there were a lot of Jehovah Witnesses who were put into prison because they refused uh, to be drafted and to do what was supposedly their duty in an unconstitutional war at that. So that one kind of caught my eye too, because that's something I've never heard about. Of course, now I'm not as knowledgeable as a lot of other people in this, but that's something I've never heard that language before.
Well, see, you can. I adamantly disagree that the government has any authority to draft you, because as soon as they, and this is coming from a person who served, so I don't want somebody going, oh, he's one of those anti-war folks. No, I served my time. I got out honorably. I now happen to serve on the Selective Service Board here in Greene County. And in looking through the one of the things I knew when a buddy of mine put me in for this, I would never get it because he told me, he said, you got to talk to the Brigadier General such and such. You know, he'll call you up. And he and I had this really long, drawn out interview, and he had asked me about my stance on the draft. And I said, I don't believe the government has any authority to draft anybody. Because if you give the application that the government has the authority to draft you to send you to, whether it's declared or undeclared war, doesn't make a difference, then you've lost the availability to negotiate your rights. The government owns you. So when the conversation was done, I knew for positive fact he was going to just tell me, well, Mr. Martz, we need to go our separate ways. You're too much of a lunatic. Oh, no, he actually invited me to sit on the Selective Service Board. And I'm like, what? No. It's like, wait a minute. We just absolutely had a huge disagreement here. But he was cool enough to say that he appreciates the thinking outside the box. And there are provisions for people if they get drafted. I mean, Muhammad Ali was one. He absolutely said, I am not going to Vietnam to kill the yellow man. They didn't do anything to me. And yes, he got sentenced to jail, did not get thrown in jail. The sentence was basically dismissed. But there are religious exemptions for people who get drafted, who decide that they're going to follow through with the draft, that they do not have to carry a firearm. They can do desk duty. They could work out in the motor pool. They can do all other kinds of different things. But as for me and mine, I am absolutely of the mindset that the government, those people that I elect or didn't elect, they just happen to sit in government, have no military authority over me to tell me that I must serve at their leisure in a war that was either declared or not declared by Congress, especially if it does not involve the application where I am providing for the common defense of the 50 states. Now, if you're providing for the common defense, I'll willingly go. But if you're trying to make the case that the common defense is Taiwan or Japan or South Korea or Saudi Arabia or even Iran or Iraq or Yemen or any of those other countries, no, I don't think they're the 51st state.
Yeah, it's funny when you talk about that too. Like, I I I know there's more than what I've seen, but someone that comes to mind when you're talking about being more of a pacifist, and but Alvin York is one of those very famous people, a soldier from World War I. He did not want to. He was a very religious person. He didn't want to go and get sent over, but he did, and he was quite the pacifist until someone made him so angry that he did some very heroic things. I mean, I believe he captured about 18 or so German soldiers by himself and got them back to base. And people were just like, "How the heck did you do that by yourself?" He, but yeah, he was a pacifist. Did not want to shoot anyone. Didn't want to carry a gun. He went anyway. He was not happy about it, and of course became this larger than life hero. But yeah, Sabaton's got a song about him. I can't remember the name of the song. Oh, 82nd All the Way. It kind of gives a little history. For those of you who like, I don't know, it's called power metal. It's not heavy. There's no screaming or anything. But if you enjoy music with a history background, every song that Sabaton does is history based. They go through World War I. They've got one on World War II. They've got one on ancient, different like samurais and the Crusaders and all these different things. The Winged Hussars, which were a Polish cavalry. They've got multiple songs on all kinds of either different armies, different historic battles, different historic people like the Red Baron and all that. So if you're into that kind of thing, if you're into that kind of music, listen to that. Or you can go on YouTube and look up the Sabaton History Channel, and they'll talk about the history behind their songs. But it's pretty cool stuff. I mean, they go real deep into what the song was about and the actual history behind that group of people, like the Night Witches, the Russian female pilots who they got called the Night Witches because they would come in at night and they would be they would dive in on the worst planes, wings made of canvas, getting shot at by anti-aircraft fire, and they would stall their engines in such a way and swoop down and dive down to get to the level to drop their bombs. And the German soldiers said it sounded like giant brooms being whisked across the floor, so they called them night witches. So anyway, I don't want to go too deep down on that because we're on Missouri stuff. But if you're ever interested in looking that up, check out Sabaton History Channel. Very, very cool stuff on all kinds of different historical events and armies. Let's see and get back into this here.
Now, you'll notice Section 19 says that all property subject to taxation in this state shall be taxed in proportion to its value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I also like 21. 21 says, and this is a no duh moment, the migration from this state cannot be prohibited.
Yeah.
What do you think you're going to do to prohibit people from leaving the state of Missouri?
Which I guess brings the question: Was that done at some time? Was that a thing that someone did, or that was an idea that someone had, and they're like, we can't do this, so we literally have to write it down? I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying, in the early history of the United States, Constitution on, were there people saying you can't leave? I don't know. It's just a question where they thought they needed to write that down.
See, I'm of a different thought process. I'm thinking, what concept came about that they even thought they had the authority
Yeah.
to keep people within the state of Missouri? I mean, Ron Paul was famous for saying that a fence that's built to keep people out is also a fence that will keep people in. So I guess if you just say in the state constitution that the mindset is that we can write a law that prohibits you from leaving the state. So somebody better put in the Constitution that you can't force people to remain in the state, that they're free to travel at their leisure.
Yeah. So that raises some interesting questions. Um here's
But I did link the in the YouTube thing. I did link the link that I've been talking about all day. I don't know where it came from, but I think it's the Springfield Greene County Missouri Constitution of 1820, Springfield Greene County history.
Yep, that's
It's
where I
from
pulled it
the
from.
local history website of the SMSU Department of History, which is now Missouri State University. It's no longer SMSU.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I remember when I was in high school, it was called SMSU at that time. So many kids from like my uh, class or several had all talked about going to SMSU. So it's kind of funny that you said that.
See,
Uh,
back when I went to high school, the one of the girls on the swim team that on the she went to SMS.
mm,
And it's funny when she got her approval letter, she was all excited about going to SMS, and we're like, what the hell was SMS? Southwest Missouri State. Like, where?
let's see. Okay, I'm trying to look. Yeah, here we go. Section 2 of the schedule. All laws now in force in the territory of Missouri which are not repugnant to this constitution shall remain in force until they expire by their own limitations or be altered or repealed by the General Assembly. Let's see what else we got. Uh, and it kind of goes into how many representatives from each county. Um, trying to just quickly scan here to see if there's anything else that like jumped out at me. Yeah, I don't see anything.
And this was done by the representatives of the people of Missouri. Actually, no, it wasn't. In convention assembled at the town of St. Louis on the 19th day of July in the year of our Lord, 1820, and of the independence of the United States of America, the 45th. David Barton, president of the convention and representative from the county of St. Louis.
Yeah, again, no idea until you brought this up. No clue. No clue that this was the first constitution of the state of Missouri. And again, I would have never thought of 1820. For some reason, I would have thought 1821 when we, I guess, officially became, part of the Union. Or I don't know. What are they? What's we have the Union and we have the people who kind of talk about the compact theory when talking about the original 13 colonies and what have you. But that's federal and not state. No, this has been again. It's it's not kind of. It's very cool to see the very first Constitution. And again, look how many pages there are here, which it doesn't really tell you page numbers, but not a lot of pages. And now look at the Constitution. in its form now, which mine is not in this room with me right now. It is downstairs
Yeah,
on a
and I
book.
forget who asked me a while back, but if they listen to this podcast, you will find that bingo is not in the 1820 Constitution.
Definitely not there. No bingo, no recreational marijuana, no abortion. None of that's in here. Very interesting. It was very, very cut and dry, very straight to the point as far as what the government
No stem
shall and shall
cell
not do.
research.
What's that?
I said there's no stem cell research,
Oh
none
yeah, I
of
forgot
that.
about that. I forgot about that one. I
And
forgot.
no Hancock Amendment either.
It's okay. Hancock Amendment, that's pointless because they'll just figure out a way to do it legislatively and ram it down your throat anyway, as far as
Yeah,
taxes
well,
go.
see, in reality, that's my next deep dive that I have to get into. I really have to figure out how it is that the Hancock Amendment is figured and configured, because like fire protection districts have to roll back because of the Hancock Amendment, and I haven't figured this out yet. But apparently, I used to think that Hancock Amendment only dealt with sales tax, but I guess it also deals with property tax as well. So when property taxes go up, the protection districts, that part of your taxation goes towards to provide fire prevention or fire department services to your house and your business. They have to stay within a certain percentage, so their revenue gets rolled back every time the cost of not the cost of living, but every time the tax increase or real estate taxes goes up, they have to roll back a certain percentage so they don't exceed the Hancock Amendment. So it's a screwy way of thinking based on what I thought the Hancock Amendment was for. So now that's an avenue, that's a rabbit hole that I have to go down now, so I can figure out the Hancock Amendment and why it is that you think all this money is going to your local fire departments, when in reality they're having to take money and put it back, because every time the property rates go up, they're exceeding the Hancock Amendment, so they're not getting rich in this either.
I will say one thing before we end this. I remember Owensville was in a co-op. We had an electrical co-op, and it was horrific. Every month, almost every month, the the rate per kilowatt hour would change. One month it would be 10, and another month it would be 12. And basically what it was is they were trying to help pay for the debt in town. And I guess what I was told, and I'll have to look into this too, that the Hancock Amendment also says that any city in Missouri cannot generate revenue or generate electricity, sell it to its citizens for profit. Like they can't do it for profit. They have to do it strictly for and just make enough money to, but they could not use it to make a profit and then take those funds and put it into other things. This town was so badly in debt with that co-op and other things that they were taking their volunteer fire department buildings and taking out second mortgages on them in order to pay off the money that they owed to the co-op because they were getting behind. And at that time, we also found out that they were giving the city workers a lot of benefits, paying for all their insurance, buying them Carhartt coats and coveralls and boots, and paying for just about everything under the sun. And then a concerned citizen group dug it up, and we finally got out of that co-op. That co-op was there's no way if the city attorney read that and later admitted to not seeing in because it when he downloaded it from the internet, he said all the pages didn't print, and he missed the part where it said if you wanted to get out, you had to find 2 to 3 cities that would step in and take your place. And that if they made investments of any kind, borrowed money, whatever to invest, and they didn't have the money to pay that back, then every member city of the co-op was on the hook to pay that debt instead of the actual electric co-op itself. So it was one of the most horrible things that I'd ever heard of. And after I don't know how many years of battle, we finally got out of the co-op, even though they tried to Hornswoggle us into staying there and went back under Ammer and UE. And as soon as they did, electric bills were easily going down $100 a month or more because they were doing estimated billing and people were catching them in it. So it was a terrible thing. But I believe the Hancock Amendment was either brought up over that or at the time Herman, Missouri was generating electric. And there was a fight because people were saying the city under the Hancock Amendment, if I'm not mistaken, cannot generate electricity, bill people for it, make a profit, and take those funds and put it into other things like general funds or anything like that. So there was a huge ordeal over that as well. Well, Tom, I appreciate you taking out a little. Actually, I appreciate you bringing this up to me and asking me if I wanted to do a short video on it. And I appreciate, as always, the knowledge and this little talk we had about a very important day, unbeknownst to me till now, of Missouri constitutional history.
I appreciate the time you've given me to do it.
All right. Well, folks, that'll do it. Again, this is only live stream. I didn't set up for recording. If you watch this later, we'll be back Tuesday night. Brandon and I will be back Tuesday night with our normal edition of the Missouri Liberty Report. Again, I was off last week with the birth of a new grandchild, and she is doing wonderful. And mama and baby and dad are all doing great. And so we'll be back to our regularly scheduled broadcast. Let's see. Tom, I don't know about you, brother, but I'm getting text messages now about needing feedback if I support ICE and Tom Homan's efforts to keep Missouri safe from illegal criminals.
I got that one earlier.
Yeah, I just got it again for like the second or third time in the last few days. God almighty. All right, Tom. Well, great talk.
I appreciate the ice that my refrigerator dispenses.
Yeah, when it comes to government agencies, it's like, I don't know about all that. But yes, the ice that comes from the ice maker in my icebox, especially over the next several days, all of you out there who live in Missouri, please be careful. It is going to be ugly for the next several days with the heat and humidity and the heat indexes. I'm so glad that I work indoors in an air conditioned building because, good God, it is going to suck for the next several days. So all of you out there that work outdoors, please stay safe. Please be careful out there because it's going to be Hades hot. And so even though the photography bug has got me completely wrapped up or wrapped around its finger, I cannot justify going out in this heat and trying to take pictures. I will stay inside to where I don't shrivel up and die. So with that being said, folks, we'll see you back here on Tuesday night at 6:30 p.m. Brandon Doherty and I will be back again for our regularly scheduled broadcast. So we'll see you right here Tuesday night, 6:30 p.m. for another edition of the Missouri Liberty Report.